Imagine someone hands you this beautifully crafted, incredibly sharp mirror, and it's designed to help you see yourself with just total clarity, you know?
Right, like every flaw, every beautiful detail.
Exactly, the absolute truth of who you are. But looking at your own reflection is, well, it's uncomfortable.
It's terrifyingly vulnerable, really.
Yeah. So instead of looking into the mirror, you decide to just paint this stunning, idealized portrait of yourself right on the glass.
So you're holding this tool of self-reflection, but using it to completely obscure the reflection itself. You basically create a barrier that's disguised as a window.
And you get all the social credit for holding the mirror, right? But you never actually have to do the agonizing work of looking at yourself.
Which is such a human thing to do.
It really is. And that is the core paradox of what we're unpacking today. Welcome, learner, to today's deep dive. We're getting into a really fascinating, highly provocative source text today. It's called Identity Politics for Spiritual Bypassing.
And it is definitely a piece of psychological and philosophical inquiry that demands we sit with a fair amount of discomfort.
A lot of discomfort, actually, because it explores what happens when two massive cultural phenomena, so identity politics and contemporary spirituality, basically crash into each other in modern culture.
And before we get too far into the weeds here, I think it is crucial to just state up front that this text touches on some really sensitive social and political themes. But our goal today isn't to take a political side or, endorse a specific ideology. We're just impartially exploring the author's observations about how humans operate.
Because we humans are incredibly clever at trying to avoid our own messy, painful emotions. I mean, we will use literally whatever tools are available to us to achieve that avoidance.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central mystery for you, the listener, as we go through this is, how do frameworks that were explicitly designed to liberate us suddenly become the exact tools we use to avoid looking in the mirror?
To understand that, we really have to look at the collision itself.
Right.
So taking a step back, we have the origin of spiritual bypassing.
Right.
The psychologist John Wellwood actually coined that term way back in 1984. It describes this classic maneuver of using spiritual ideas like non-attachment or love and light to basically dodge unresolved trauma or dismiss someone's valid grievances.
It's using transcendence as an escape hatch.
Exactly.
And then on the other side of the collision, you have the roots of identity politics. Now, modern identity politics really traces back to the 1977 Combahee River collective statement by Black feminist lesbians.
Right, a highly influential document.
Yeah, and it was designed as this vital, necessary tool to organize around shared marginalization, to, resist power structures and force society to look at its own ugliest systemic reflections.
Which is such an important historical context to keep in mind. Because today, the term gets used in so many different ways. Critics on the right view it as inherently divisive. Critics on the left say it distracts from class issues, while its defenders argue it's absolutely essential for revealing the blind spots of people in power.
Right. But what's fascinating here is this strange zone of intersection the author zeroes in on.
Yes.
These two completely different worlds are crashing into each other right now in wellness culture, in progressive spiritual communities, new age circles, yoga centers.
Places where people have basically become completely fluent in both the language of political oppression and the language of spiritual awakening.
It's like trying to run two different operating systems on the exact same computer at the same time.
That's a great way to put it.
Because one operating system is meant to analyze external power structures and demand material justice, right? But the other one is designed to elevate personal consciousness and deconstruct the ego. So what happens when people start using the language of political oppression to perform spiritual enlightenment?
The system glitches.
Yeah.
And the text argues that this glitch manifests in how identity itself becomes sacralized. It basically turns into a form of spiritual currency.
Spiritual currency, wow.
Yeah, in some of these modern spaces, marginalized identity categories morph into actual spiritual credentials. Suffering is increasingly treated as this initiatory experience.
It's a crucible.
Exactly, a crucible that automatically confers moral authority, and therefore spiritual authority. So the oppressed are viewed as inherently closer to the truth or divinity, simply by virtue of their social category.
Okay, wait, I'm stuck on something here. If my moral or spiritual authority comes entirely from who I am socially, which is, a category I didn't choose and usually can't change, doesn't that completely kill the motivation to actually do any inner work?
That is exactly the text's point. It creates total psychological stagnation.
Wow.
It leads to a kind of credential inflation. If your authority relies entirely on your identity, the reward structure is built for just being, not for actually becoming.
Because if you already hold the ultimate credential, there's zero motivation to do the agonizing work of looking at your own shadow.
Right.
You don't have to examine your own cruelty, your own manipulations, or your ego, because your social category acts as this permanent shield against criticism.
And real spiritual awakening is rigorous.
Yeah.
I mean, it demands you dismantle yourself. It requires ruthless honesty about your own flaws and a willingness to be fundamentally changed.
Which is hard.
It's incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But if you replace that ongoing, highly uncomfortable process with a static social category, you're locked in place. You substitute the messy work of actual transformation with just the performance of virtue.
Because if you can't rely on actual internal transformation, you have to prove your worth externally. You have to use the exact right language, show the correct deference, publicly declare the right ideological positions. It becomes this new ritual of purification.
And, it is really vital to note here that the text observes this isn't always some cynical manipulation.
Right, right.
A lot of people performing these rituals are genuinely, desperately trying to be good people.
For sure. But, and to you listening right now, have you ever noticed this dynamic in your own social media feeds or community groups where people seem way more focused on performing the right positions than actually transforming themselves?
It's everywhere once you know what to look for. Because performance, even incredibly sincere performance, is not transformation, it's a simulation.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. How does this avoidance disguise itself in everyday language? Because nobody in progressive circles is using old school bypassing terms like karma to explain away poverty anymore.
Oh, definitely not. They'd be immediately called out for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The bypassing has adapted. It wears progressive language now. Avoidance sounds like healing, trauma, collective liberation, ancestral wisdom.
Which completely changes how these communities handle trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And the text has a deeply nuanced take here. It acknowledges without any hesitation that systemic trauma is incredibly real and devastating.
Yeah.
But the bypass happens when trauma stops being a process you move through and becomes a fixed, permanent identity.
The wound becomes sacred.
Exactly. And that is a profound psychological trap. Because if your trauma is your primary identity, the central lens for literally every interpersonal interaction, then to suggest that healing is possible can actually feel like an existential threat.
Like you're being asked to give up your moral authority.
Right, in your very sense of self.
It's as if someone gets a deep, painful cut on their arm, but instead of cleaning it, letting it scar, and letting it heal, they put an ornate golden frame around the open wound. And they just carry it everywhere as their primary identification. They demand that everyone who meets them interact with the wound first. Like, look at my wound, respect my wound, but whatever you do, do not ask me to bandage it.
And, ironically, while staying perpetually stuck in that open wound, the wellness industry simultaneously turns healing into a curated achievement.
Oh, the digital status symbol.
Exactly. You share your beautiful, perfectly linear healing journey online to establish authority and gather an audience. Ignoring the fact that genuine healing is actually non-linear, it's ugly, and it really doesn't make for good content.
I mean, anyone who has done real psychological work knows it involves crying on the bathroom floor, making the same mistake 3 times, and having to apologize for your own toxic behavior.
Right. It's messy.
Yeah, it does not make for a pleasing aesthetic on social media. And this neatly curated performance seamlessly connects to how the concept of collective liberation gets weaponized to just dodge personal accountability entirely.
The logic basically operates like this. If systemic oppression is the root cause of all suffering, then the system is to blame for absolutely everything in my life.
So I am off the hook for my personal choices.
Exactly.
It becomes the ultimate scapegoat. If I act terribly to a friend or I manipulate my partner, I can just claim I'm reacting to systemic exhaustion.
Right. Your bad behavior is just a symptom of late-stage capitalism.
Exactly. I don't have to apologize. But while systemic forces are undeniably profound, losing all personal agency is a massive bypass.
Huge. If you believe you are entirely a product of the system, you indefinitely defer the work of introspection. You never have to own your own stuff.
So if you have a community filled with individuals who are stuck in their wounds, performing virtue, and dodging personal accountability, what is the collateral damage? What does this look like when it scales up?
Well, the toll just ferments over time. For the individual, the avoided emotional material doesn't just vanish because you use the right progressive buzzwords. It turns into unexamined rage and a really deep psychological brittleness.
And relationally.
Relationally, you end up with connections based purely on shared ideology. You aren't bonding over human intimacy or vulnerability. You're bonding over a shared assurance that you are both on the right side of history.
Which naturally leads to the community dysfunctions the text highlights, like purity spirals.
Oh, yes.
We've all seen this happen. A group chat or a community starts out really supportive, but because everyone is substituting ideology for actual inner work, there is this escalating, unspoken pressure to demonstrate your purity.
Someone uses a term that was totally acceptable 6 months ago, but is now slightly outdated. Another person jumps in to correct them, not out of care, but to publicly demonstrate their superior grasp of the new vocabulary.
And then someone else has to escalate the critique to show they are even more aware.
The standard for acceptable behavior just gets higher and tighter every single day.
Until everyone in the space is living in a state of low-level terror, just paralyzed by the fear of stepping out of line and becoming the next target.
And this environment naturally breeds covert hierarchies. These spaces almost always explicitly claim to reject hierarchy. They pride themselves on being, flat egalitarian communities.
Right.
But they simply reproduce hierarchy informally, basing it entirely on identity categories. The people with the most marginalized identities wield unquestionable informal authority, and those with privilege just walk on eggshells, constantly deferring to avoid conflict.
So it's still a hierarchy, it's just functioning under the illusion of equality, which honestly makes it even harder to challenge because you aren't even allowed to admit the power dynamic exists.
Exactly. And when the tension in that covert hierarchy inevitably snaps, you get conflict as purge.
My least favorite dynamic.
When someone violates the purity spiral, the community doesn't do the incredibly hard, uncomfortable work of repair. They don't talk through the nuance, they just expel the person.
They cut them out like a tumor. It is the ultimate avoidance mechanism because excommunicating someone makes the group feel incredibly safe and pure since they get to project all the badness onto the scapegoat they just kicked out.
Right. They never have to look at their own complicity. And we connect this to the bigger picture. The political cost of this behavior is just staggering.
How so?
When movements become a theater of spiritual performance, their primary goal shifts. They are no longer focused on achieving structural change. They are focused on achieving personal purification. They get amazing at naming harm and deconstructing language, but terrible at building the broad, messy coalitions actually required to change material power.
Because building a real coalition means you have to sit in a room and work with people who might not use the exact right words or who might disagree with you on half the issues. You have to tolerate discomfort.
Yes.
But wait, does this mean the author's telling us to abandon identity politics entirely?
No, absolutely not. The author clarifies this emphatically. Identity politics remains a powerful, vital tool for liberation. But we have to constantly ask ourselves, are we using it to build power and create justice, or just using it to hide from our own psychology?
Right, so if avoiding the hard work is the problem, what does actually facing it look like? The text calls the solution integration, taking both politics and spirituality seriously.
Which means tolerating the absolute messiness of politics. Compromising.
Yeah.
Working alongside people who trigger you.
And doing the honest, deeply uncomfortable spiritual self-inquiry. Discovering things about your own ego that don't neatly fit into a narrative of being the pure, innocent victim.
Which brings us to a profound philosophical tension from the source. The paradox of the self.
Okay, lay this out for us.
And on one hand, spiritual traditions often teach no self. That the rigid boundaries of your individual identity, your race, your gender, your ego, are ultimately an illusion.
Right. But then identity politics violently insists that the structured, marginalized self is highly real, politically urgent, and dictates your experience.
Exactly. The bypass happens when you use the spiritual idea of no self to dismiss the very real political harm happening to someone's body. Like, why are you upset about systemic racism? We're all just stardust.
Oh, wow, yeah. Or you use the political insistence on identity to avoid the spiritual inquiry that reveals we are more than just our labels.
Right. You refuse to see the shared humanity.
So what does this all mean? How do you hold two completely opposing truths in your head at the same time?
The text suggests we have to develop double vision. It's a psychological tightrope. You have to fully see and validate the reality of structural harm while maintaining a connection to a transcendent experience that keeps you grounded so you aren't consumed by that harm.
Double vision completely changes how we handle accountability, too. Because in bypassing communities, accountability is either totally avoided or it turns into performative self-punishment.
Like writing a 10-page apology note, just to show the purity spiral how sorry you are.
Exactly. But true accountability requires holding yourself with both brutal honesty and profound compassion, changing your behavior without installing wrongness as your permanent identity.
You commit to doing better without performing your guilt for an audience.
So bring this back to you, the learner. Why does this matter? Whether you're navigating a tense workplace, scrolling through a polarized social media feed, or just trying to be a grounded community member.
Of recognizing these escape hatches,
Yeah.
seeing when you or others are using progressive language to avoid vulnerable feelings, allows you to step off the merry-go-round.
It allows you to put down the paintbrush, stop painting the idealized portrait, and actually look into the mirror to show up authentically without needing the framework to protect you.
And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought drawn directly from the open inquiries at the end of the text. Something to mull over.
Let's hear it.
The author asks, what is the role of genuine unperformed grief in our communities? And how does our desperate attempt to suppress that grief fuel these exact dynamics of avoidance? A question definitely worth carrying with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and whatever you do, keep looking beneath the surface.